Hello, and welcome to this presentation of Cultural Diversity in Death. My name is Cindy Rowe, and I'm an MSW candidate of the School of Social Work at Marywood University, and I'm going to take you through sort of an overview of the different practices and customs surrounding death in different cultures. So we're going to be looking at many of the common beliefs, customs, and practices surrounding death in the traditions of Judaism, as well as those within the different nations of Native American peoples, those inherent to the Islamic culture, and the Latino people. It will then conclude with a discussion on how this relates to social work practice and being a culturally informed social work practitioner. So in looking at Judaism, the Jewish faith is steeped in tradition and ritual, which helps guide the bereft through periods of loss. One thing that's important to remember is the basic rule of diversity, meaning that since each and every one of us is an individual and come from various backgrounds, you're going to find differences in beliefs, attitudes, and practices, not only among people from vastly different cultures, but also among people who share the same cultural background. So funeral customs in the Jewish tradition can vary greatly, not only among the different sects of Judaism, but there can also be regional differences, as well as differences from family to family. For the purposes of this discussion, though, we're going to focus on the practices and customs that are most common. So the timeliness of the burial of the deceased is very important, as it's usually done within 24 hours after death. This doesn't always happen, though, as burials are forbidden to take place on days like Shabbat, which is the Sabbath day, or on other religious holidays. According to Jewish tradition, the commandment of mitzvah calls on members of the immediate family, including the spouse, parents, children, and siblings, who are all specifically referred to as the mourners, to help their loved ones on to their final resting place by making all the arrangements for the funeral. These preparatory activities, as well as other specific tasks and rituals they perform in the days following the burial, are known as Avelim. Kosher practices also dictate some specifics with regards to the burial of the deceased. A simple casket, for example, that is made from biodegradable material like wood and is made without the use of any nails and has no adornments, is used typically to house the body. Also, unless required by state health or local health department laws, the body isn't embalmed. So the location of the funeral service is dictated by family and congregational tradition, and it can take place in either a synagogue or in a funeral home. The mourners, again, who are the immediate family of the deceased, wait in a separate room until the service starts at the funeral location, while other friends and family gather in for the service. While the mourners are waiting for the service to begin, they will oftentimes attach a black ribbon to their clothing, which is known as a karaya, which represents the tearing of cloth, and they will wear this for the next 7 days. So once the congregates are seated, the mourners proceed into the room where the service is being held, as opening prayers are recited. The eulogy, or hesped, is then delivered. And this is a way of honoring the deceased person, and it's meant to offer comfort to the grieving family. Another prayer is then recited by the congregates as the recession of the mourners takes place. The other congregates then exit, and then the pallbearers move the casket to the waiting hearse. And then upon arriving at the cemetery, it's not uncommon for pallbearers to stop 7 times along the way to the grave, because this symbolizes the emotional difficulty that accompanies death. And kosher law also dictates that grave liners shouldn't be used, because the body of the deceased is meant to return to the dust of the earth. However, again, according to local and state health laws, this may be overridden based on those state and local health laws. And mourners and congregates often recite the Kaddish as the casket is lowered to its final resting place. And to further aid the deceased to their final resting place, each mourner and congregate will often place a shovel full of dirt onto the grave as they're leaving. And also dirt from the Holy Land of Israel may also be added to the grave as another way of offering, making offering to the deceased, because this symbolizes the holiness of their final resting place. So while all funeral and burial preparations are traditionally the responsibility of the immediate family, Shiva represents the time to offer support and condolences to the family so they can begin the healing process. After the cemetery burial, visitors may call on the mourners at their home. Before entering, visitors are encouraged to wash their hands, for example, before going outside. As another act of Avelam, a family member will light a Shiva candle in the home, which will burn for 7 days. The flame of this candle is symbolic of the soul of the departed. Practicing modesty is also important for the mourning family at this time, because the focus is on the deceased rather than on the self. So things like covering all the mirrors in the home occur, as does the meal of condolence is another important aspect of Shiva, and it's often provided by family and friends and congregation members. Foods that symbolize life, including hard-boiled eggs, lentils, and bread, are typically served in a meal following the funeral service, and as well as being offered to the family for the next 7 days that they sit Shiva. The first 3 days of Shiva is commonly a time of intense mourning for the family. Also, self-modesty, in addition to covering the mirrors, self-modesty is important, and it's reflected in the family member's abstinence from wearing any new clothes, from wearing leather shoes or cosmetics, from shaving and getting haircuts, from bathing, and doing other personal tasks other than handling basic hygiene. So at this time, the family sequesters themselves in their home, leaving only to attend synagogue or Shabbat. Also abstaining from all pleasurable activities, including sex, reading, watching TV or listening to music, going to work, and attending festivities is not happening at this time. And family members also recite the Kaddish 3 times a day in honor of their loved one during this time. So some individuals may mark the end of Shiva by taking a short walk around the block or in their neighborhood. And this symbolizes their start of re-entry into society after mourning their loss. Although at this point family members will return to work, they still abstain from attending festivities and will continue with reciting the Kaddish 3 times a day for the next 23 days. So it's vital to be aware of the differences in customs and practices among the many different Native American nations as well. For example, some Native American peoples, they bury their dead in an upright sitting position with the deceased person facing east. Others, such as the many nations from the Central Plains and Midwestern U.S., they don't inter the deceased in graves, but rather place the wrapped body on a raised platform or on a platform in a tree. Still others bury their deceased in graves, some in shallow individual graves with headstones. Sometimes they're covered with dirt and stones. And while others bury their dead in large communal burial mounds. And these mounds will hold the remains of every person within the community. And so, because the people of the Chippewa Nation, for example, believe that the journey to the afterlife takes 4 days after the deceased is buried, burial takes place as soon as possible after death, typically on the same day. It is the duty of the surviving family members to help guide the deceased to the afterlife. So they will first hold a powwow at the deceased person's home the night of the burial. And at dusk, a fire is lit at the head of the deceased's grave, and this fire is relit every night for the next 4 nights to help guide that loved one onto their next place. And on the 4th night, a medicine man or woman within their community holds a community feast at the home of the deceased. And at this ceremony, a special dish for food is presented to the next of kin, and this next of kin makes an offering of food to the deceased person. At the close of this feast, this family member then keeps this dish and uses it for 1 year, bringing it to all feasts and festivities within the community, and again offering food to the deceased person. This helps demonstrate the connection of the deceased not only to their ancestors but to the community as well. Another important part of the powwow is the giveaway ceremony, where all of the deceased's belongings are given to community members. Like many other Native American peoples, the Kiowa and Navajo also believe that because people are born of the earth at the start of life, that they must return to the earth after they die. So this necessitates the immediate burial of the body after the deceased is bathed, so that their spirit can move on to join their spirit ancestors in the spirit world. In the Navajo tradition, the body is taken to its grave upon a horse. This horse, after delivering the person to its grave, the horse may also be killed and buried alongside the deceased in order to provide transportation for the deceased spirit on their journey. Among the people of the Oneida Nation, celebratory feasts take place a couple of times a year, like in the spring and fall, and this is a way to commemorate those who have died. Everyone in the community brings food to share, and family members of the deceased bring that special dish in order to present their loved one with food. So this ceremony is very similar to what occurs in Mexico at the Day of the Dead festivals. And it's very interesting to know that among both, all these Native American peoples, that belief in the afterlife is so common. And again, according to Islamic beliefs, the souls of those who have passed are called by Allah on the Day of Judgment to account for the sins they committed in life. Those who have upheld the 5 pillars of Islam, and these include Shahada, which is the profession of faith by reciting the tenet, there is no God but Allah, Muhammad is his prophet, and the tenet of Salat, which is praying 5 times a day by kneeling towards the east and touching the head to the earth, and by paying alms to the less fortunate on a regular basis. And it also includes fasting during Ramadan and making the pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in a person's lifetime, as well as having done good deeds and asking for repentance for one's transgressions. All of these things will be considered by Allah in his decision to grant access to paradise, or Jannah. Those who are deemed unworthy are then cast into Jahannam, which is hell, where they'll endure more suffering. Because death is the first step in freeing the soul from the body, The burial must take place as soon as possible after death in the Islamic tradition, just like in the Native American tradition and in Judaism. After the body is washed, it is wrapped in a white shroud. No coffin is used. Family and friends walk in a procession and accompany the body to the burial plot. Short condolences are offered to the family at the gravesite. Expressions of grief are typically very subdued, and flowers aren't used or offered to the family. If any service is held, men and women are segregated, and the body is placed in the grave so they're facing east towards Mecca. And some families may also have a gathering at the family home where simple foods are offered to those in attendance, and those attending may be the ones to bring food to the family at this time. The family will often mourn their loss for 3 days, while some sects have a much longer period of mourning, which lasts up to 40 days. And widows can mourn for over 6 months, and many widows will wear black for an entire year after losing their spouse. In the Mexican culture, death is seen as a natural part of life, with the deceased beginning anew in the afterlife. Immediately following death, the body is washed, dressed, and laid in a basic coffin in the home. For the first 2 days, a steady procession of extended family, friends, and community members visit with the mourners and the deceased, and they share memories of the deceased person's life, and they enjoy a wide array of food and drinks, and provide gifts, bring food, or even money, which all may be given to the family. And mourners may also bring gifts to be offered to the deceased to help them in their journey to their new life. These gifts, as well as other mementos and important personal effects, are placed in the coffin with the deceased. A more formal wake, known as a velorio, is often held after the home services. The coffin for this service is commonly covered in glass, and this symbolizes the distinction between life and death. Burning candles are commonly placed at each corner of the coffin, and the leftover candles are kept as a keepsake by the immediate family members after the service, because it's believed to be a symbol of good luck. The velorio is commonly another all-night affair with throngs of visitors from the community coming to pay their respects and again to share their stories and memories of the deceased person. The religious influences of Catholicism are also another important aspect of the Mexican culture. A Catholic priest would typically lead the funeral service the next day, where prayers are offered to help the deceased on their journey. Because death and its associated grief are accepted as the natural progression of life, extreme expressions of sadness in the Mexican tradition are not only socially acceptable but highly encouraged. After the service, the entire community will often walk in a procession that escorts the deceased to the cemetery. After burial, the family engages in novenas, which are prayers for their loved one's safe passage on their journey, and this also helps them express their grief, and they do this for 9 days. Because the belief in the afterlife is such an integral part of the Mexican culture, every day on the November 1st and 2nd, Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead festivals, are held to honor those who have passed. It is believed that during this time, the deceased come back home to visit with their family and their friends. Ofrendas, or altars, are made in the home to honor the deceased, and these are adorned with colorful cloth, flowers, candles, pictures of the deceased, as well as offerings of the deceased person's favorite foods, their favorite drinks, objects, things that were important to them, things like that. On the second day of the festival, a lively parade with music, dance, and revelers who adorn themselves in skeleton-like makeup and colorful dress costumes ensues, culminating in an all-night celebration at the cemetery, where family members gather around their loved ones' graves to clean and decorate them. Continued music, dancing, food, and socializing among the community again last through the night. So increasing cultural competence for the social work practitioner involves educating oneself on the beliefs and customs of different populations. Doing so helps the social worker be with both the client who might be facing death as well as with that client's family. And it would also help prepare the practitioner to serve as the cultural broker or go-between between the client and other service providers like their physician, other medical staff, first responders, any other providers who are involved in their care. Being informed in this way also helps the social worker navigate the various ethical dilemmas that may crop up, so they're better able to help advocate for the client. This can involve things such as protecting the dying client's right to self-determination, such as being aware of their right to deny treatment and ensuring that the client is adequately informed of all pertinent facts regarding palliative care or what can and can't occur to hasten their death. And again, based on cultural customs, the client may have very different views about what is acceptable or what is not acceptable at the end stages of life. So the culturally informed social worker is going to be prepared for that. Work with those who are at the end stages of life also means that the social worker needs to be well informed of the implications and requirements for example, hospice eligibility, the current impending death with dignity laws, and the client's right to refuse food and drink or any life-sustaining treatments. And it's also important to know that end-of-life care also involves care of family members after their loved one's death. Social workers might be the ones to connect family members with existing grief support groups, mental health services, or may even lead these types of groups themselves. Within the hospice setting, such services are commonly available for family members for a year or more after their loved one's death. So thanks for watching this PowerPoint presentation on the different cultural aspects and beliefs and customs of death. And if you're looking for more information on this reference list here, there's quite a few different websites and resources to give you more information on specific beliefs based on specific cultures. So once again, thanks for watching, and talk to you again soon.